It all started with a single, devastating announcement that swept through the palace like a shockwave. 5 minutes ago, the official statement hit the press, and it left everyone around the world in stunned silence. The words were precise, cold, and unyielding. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, would be excluded from all future communications regarding the line of succession, including those involving her own children. 5 simple lines on a memo, yet they carried consequences that could ripple through the monarchy for decades. Did anyone expect the crown to take such a decisive, unprecedented step? Could anyone have predicted that a mother could be so formally, so publicly, cut out from the very future her children were set to inherit? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Think about it for a moment. This isn't just a rumor. This isn't a speculation piece written by tabloids hungry for clicks. This is the palace itself, confirming a move so severe, it leaves even seasoned royal watchers questioning the balance between tradition, power, and personal loyalty. A mother erased from the conversations that shape her children's future. Can you imagine the weight of that decision? The subtle, invisible walls that would now surround Archie and Lilibet, preventing any insights, guidance, or even updates from reaching the mother who gave them life. And the question that hangs over everything is the most terrifying one. Why now? Sources tell us the decision wasn't made lightly. Months of quiet deliberation, confidential meetings, and behind-closed-doors discussions culminated in this moment. But what was the trigger? Was it a recent leak, a confrontation, or perhaps a final straw after years of simmering tension? One insider described the atmosphere as palpably tense, like the palace was bracing for a storm that had been coming for a long time. And the storm? It isn't just about Meghan herself. It's about succession, about the hierarchy of power, and about the unspoken rules that govern every whisper within the walls of Buckingham Palace. Let's rewind a little and set the scene. Meghan Markle, a former actress from California, married Prince Harry, a grandson of Queen Elizabeth II, in a wedding that captivated millions around the globe. The fairy tale beginning seemed perfect, love conquering tradition, modernity meeting monarchy. But as the years went on, cracks appeared. Reports of tension with royal staff, disagreements over public roles, and the controversial decision to step back from official duties painted a picture that was far more complicated than the fairy tale narrative suggested. Yet, even in the darkest months of the Megxit era, few could have imagined a day like this, when the palace would formally state that she would have no say, no knowledge, and no involvement in matters concerning the line of succession for her own children. But let's pause and ask, what does this exclusion really mean? At first glance, it might seem like an administrative move, some bureaucratic reshuffling of royal protocols. But the implications are far deeper. The line of succession is not just a list. It's a lifeline that dictates access, influence, and identity within the monarchy. Being excluded from those communications is a signal, a public and private statement. You are no longer a participant in decisions that shape your children's destiny. It is, in effect, a silencing. And it's a bold move in an institution that rarely changes anything overnight. The palace moves slowly, methodically, like a chess master, always thinking 3, 4, sometimes 5 steps ahead. For them to take a step like this now, it sends a message louder than any press release ever could. Insiders have revealed that the memo confirming Meghan's exclusion was circulated with quiet urgency. It wasn't a press statement designed for public optics. It was an internal declaration meant for those in power. But somehow, the information leaked, and when it reached Meghan's team, the shock was immediate. Imagine receiving a formal notice that the institution you married into is not only restricting your access to critical information, but effectively removing your voice from the future of your own children. That's a level of isolation that cuts deeper than any headline. And yet, the palace insists that this is about maintaining tradition, about protecting protocols, and about ensuring the smooth functioning of succession communications. The question no one can ignore is, at what cost? The timing is also critical. 5 minutes ago is not just a timestamp, it's a signal. Why release this confirmation now? Some speculate it's a preemptive move, a defensive strike against anticipated public commentary, perhaps even ahead of a potential media revelation. Others suggest it's a culmination of months of private warning signs, subtle maneuvers to limit Meghan's influence. What is clear is that the palace wanted this to be definitive. There is no ambiguity, no temporary suspension, no window for negotiation. The doors are closed, and the lines of communication are permanently rerouted. But there's another layer here, one that few outside the palace walls may fully appreciate: the psychological impact. This isn't just about paperwork or formalities. Being excluded from communications about your children, from updates about their roles, education, or public appearances, is a form of erasure. It's a message that resonates emotionally, socially, and symbolically. Royal experts note that while public perception often focuses on titles and ceremonies, the real power lies in access to information and decision-making channels. By cutting Meghan out, the palace is ensuring that her influence over her children's royal trajectory is limited, if not entirely neutralized. And for a mother, that is perhaps the most painful exclusion of all. Of course, speculation runs wild. What will Meghan do next? Will she speak out? Or will she be forced to navigate this new reality in silence? Sources hint that Harry has already attempted private interventions, reaching out to senior officials, hoping to advocate on behalf of his wife and children. But insiders say the palace response was resolute. This is final. The decision, they claim, is rooted in a combination of historical precedent, concern for protocol, and perhaps an anticipation of future controversies. And yet, even within the walls of Buckingham Palace, there are whispers that this move could ignite the very conflicts it aims to prevent. Because when a mother is cut out of the picture so publicly, the story rarely stays quiet for long. And then there's the public element. Royal observers, historians, and media outlets around the world are dissecting every word of the announcement. Social media erupted almost instantly, with fans and critics alike weighing in on the decision. Some see it as a necessary step to protect the monarchy from scandal. Others view it as unnecessarily harsh, a punitive measure that risks alienating public sentiment, and, perhaps more importantly, the very family it seeks to shield. The debate is fierce, and the narrative is still unfolding, but one thing is certain: history is watching. So, why does this story matter right now? Because this isn't just another headline about royal tension or family drama. This is a turning point. It marks a moment where the institution, steeped in centuries of tradition, drew a line that has never been drawn before. A mother, a duchess, and a figure who has captivated the world is formally barred from the conversations that will determine her children's place in history. The implications are vast, not just for Meghan, but for Harry, for Archie, for Lilibet, and for the future of the monarchy itself. And perhaps the most haunting question of all lingers in the air: how did we get here? How did events escalate from whispers of tension, disagreements over protocol, and media scrutiny to a point where formal exclusion became the only path the palace could see? There are no easy answers, and the palace itself is unlikely to offer clarity anytime soon. What we do know is that the next steps will be watched, analyzed, and debated for years to come. And yet, as shocking as this moment is, the story is far from over. Because just when it seemed the palace had finalized its position, insiders hint that there's more, something even more revealing waiting behind the closed doors of Buckingham, something that could change the narrative entirely. And the moment you hear what came next, you'll understand why even the most seasoned royal watchers are saying this could redefine the monarchy as we know it. The palace announcement landed like a bomb. 5 minutes ago, staff confirmed a statement that would ripple through royal circles and dominate headlines around the world. For Meghan Markle, it wasn't just news, it was a seismic shift in her relationship with the monarchy. The statement was concise, official, and utterly unambiguous. Meghan would be excluded from all future communications regarding the line of succession, including those that directly involved her children. The phrasing was clinical, but the impact was anything but. This wasn't a rumor, a suggestion, or a symbolic gesture. This was the palace itself drawing a boundary, a cold, sharp line that said, without question, you are no longer part of these discussions. So why now? Why issue a statement that seemed to appear out of nowhere, creating shockwaves through both the royal household and the media? Sources inside Buckingham Palace say that the timing was deliberate. It came just after a series of private meetings, after long discussions behind closed doors, and possibly as a reaction to an internal leak that threatened to undermine the institution. The palace wanted to ensure the public record reflected its stance before any speculation could spiral out of control. But in doing so, they created a storm that no one anticipated. The announcement itself was delivered quietly to senior staff first. The language was precise, almost surgical, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Effective immediately, the Duchess of Sussex is to be excluded from all future communications regarding succession matters, it read. Staff members who received it described a palpable tension in the room, a mix of shock, disbelief, and, in some cases, relief. It was the kind of moment where everyone knew that nothing would ever be the same again. For Meghan, this meant losing formal access to documents, briefings, and updates about her children's roles and responsibilities within the monarchy, a position no other royal spouse has ever been stripped of in such a definitive manner. Immediately, questions arose. How could the palace make such a sweeping decision? How could a mother be removed from conversations concerning her own children's future? And more importantly, what precedent does this set for the monarchy? Historically, royal spouses have been given at least indirect access to succession matters, even if they are not fully engaged in governance. But in Meghan's case, the decision was not just about protocol. It was about control, boundaries, and perhaps even caution. The palace seems to have concluded that allowing her continued involvement posed risks too great to ignore. The impact of the announcement on staff cannot be overstated. Palace aides, advisors, and courtiers alike were instructed to treat the directive as absolute. There would be no exceptions, no temporary allowances, and no secret communications. Anyone attempting to circumvent the order would be subject to strict internal review. For those working closely with Meghan, the news was devastating, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and tension. The Duchess, accustomed to being involved in family decisions, would now be sidelined entirely. And yet, the palace maintained that this move was not punitive. It was protective, designed to safeguard the integrity of succession communications and prevent potential future conflicts. For Meghan's team, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Receiving official confirmation of her exclusion was a shock, even for those who had anticipated some form of tension. Privately, aides described the moment as jaw-dropping, heartbreaking, and unbelievably final. They knew that this was more than a memo. It was a declaration of the palace's stance on her role, her influence, and her involvement in shaping the futures of Archie and Lilibet. The exclusion was both practical and symbolic, sending a message that echoed far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. Meghan Markle's voice would no longer carry weight in matters concerning the monarchy's succession. The public reaction, once the announcement leaked, was immediate and intense. Royal enthusiasts, critics, and global media outlets dissected every word, analyzing the tone, timing, and implications. Social media erupted, with hashtags trending almost instantly, opinions divided between outrage, support, and speculation. Some commentators framed it as a necessary action, a measure to preserve the monarchy's stability. Others called it unprecedented, a move that bordered on cruelty. And yet, amid the noise, one truth stood out. The palace had taken a decisive action that few saw coming, altering the course of the monarchy in a way that could have far-reaching consequences. To understand why this announcement matters, it's essential to grasp the weight of succession communications. These are not merely administrative memos. They are lifelines within the monarchy, detailing everything from line of succession updates to emergency protocols, ceremonial duties, and historical record-keeping. Being excluded from such communications is a subtle yet profound form of erasure. It signals that the palace no longer trusts the individual with sensitive information, nor sees them as a necessary participant in decisions about the future of the royal line. In Meghan's case, it is a stark reminder of the limitations imposed upon her, despite her marriage into the royal family. Staff described the mood in the palace as tense and watchful. Every detail of Meghan's exclusion has been scrutinized. Advisors are concerned about the potential fallout from both the public and within the royal family itself. There is awareness that this decision could reignite media storms, especially given the history of public statements, interviews, and perceived conflicts surrounding Meghan and Harry. Even the most seasoned courtiers acknowledge that the move is bold, unprecedented, and potentially explosive. Yet, the palace leadership appears unwavering, signaling that the decision was carefully considered and is meant to be absolute. Behind the scenes, the decision also reflects long-standing concerns about influence, access, and protocol. Meghan's history within the monarchy is complex. From early conflicts with staff to high-profile media interviews, there have been repeated tensions between personal ambition and royal expectation. The palace has consistently sought to manage these conflicts discreetly, balancing public perception with internal cohesion. But this latest announcement suggests that discretion is no longer sufficient. The palace believes that formal exclusion is the only way to safeguard the integrity of succession communications and, by extension, the monarchy itself. Even within Meghan and Harry's circle, the news has generated fear, frustration, and speculation. Sources indicate that Harry immediately attempted to intervene, reaching out privately to senior officials in hopes of reversing or mitigating the decision. According to insiders, his efforts were met with polite but firm refusal. The message was clear: the decision is final, and no amount of negotiation will alter the new status quo. For Harry, this represents a personal and symbolic loss, as his wife is being sidelined from matters that affect their children's future, a realm in which he once assumed joint influence. The ramifications extend beyond personal relationships. Public perception is now a critical factor. How will the world interpret Meghan's exclusion? Will it reinforce narratives of royal rigidity, internal conflict, or institutional control? Already, commentators are framing it as a turning point, a moment when the monarchy demonstrated both its authority and its willingness to enforce boundaries, regardless of personal relationships. In the age of social media, every move is magnified, dissected, and debated, and the palace's decision will not escape scrutiny. But the most compelling aspect of this announcement is its symbolism. Exclusion from succession communications is not just about access. It's about influence, legacy, and the invisible power that guides the monarchy. By removing Meghan from these conversations, the palace is effectively controlling the flow of information to her children, limiting her ability to participate in shaping their roles and experiences within the royal family. It is a move that reverberates emotionally as much as administratively, signaling a clear boundary that few outside the palace fully understand. And yet, even as the announcement spreads and staff absorb its implications, one fact becomes increasingly clear. This is only the beginning. Royal watchers, historians, and insiders alike recognize that such a sweeping move is rarely a final act. There are always consequences, reactions, and responses that ripple outward, often unpredictably. The exclusion may provoke new strategies, media maneuvers, or even private interventions that could redefine relationships within the family. For Meghan, Harry, Archie, and Lilibet, the next steps will be critical, and the stakes have never been higher. So, as we watch this story unfold, the question becomes, what comes next? How will Meghan respond to a formal exclusion from the very conversations that shape her children's futures? And what does this mean for Harry, who has long balanced public scrutiny with private loyalty? The answers are not yet clear, but one thing is certain: the palace has drawn a line, and everyone is now forced to reckon with its consequences. But the announcement was only the first shock. Behind the formal statement lies a deeper story, one that hints at tension, planning, and a future the palace is preparing for, a scenario that could redefine Meghan's place in the family and the monarchy itself. And that story, as we are about to discover, is far more complicated and dramatic than the memo alone could ever reveal. 5 minutes may seem like an eternity in the royal world, or barely a heartbeat. But in the palace, every moment counts, and every decision is the product of months, sometimes years, of careful calculation. While the announcement of Meghan's exclusion from succession communications appeared sudden to the public, insiders reveal that it was actually the culmination of a very specific trigger event, one that forced the palace to act decisively and without hesitation. It wasn't just protocol, history, or speculation. Something happened behind the closed doors of Buckingham Palace that pushed the institution to take unprecedented measures. And the timing? Perfectly calculated. The trigger, sources say, occurred just 48 hours before the announcement. A private meeting, unrecorded and unseen, reportedly set the tone for what the palace calls a final and irreversible decision. While the details remain shrouded in secrecy, whispers from insiders paint a picture of tension, confrontation, and a revelation that left senior officials no choice but to act. According to one source, the situation involved not just Meghan, but the complex intersection of her influence, her children's future roles, and the potential for public controversy if left unchecked. In short, it was a perfect storm, carefully concealed until the palace could respond. So what was this trigger? While the palace has not publicly confirmed the exact details, multiple insiders suggest it was a combination of an internal misstep and the anticipation of public exposure. It could have been a leak of sensitive succession information, a breach of protocol, or even a planned statement or action by Meghan that threatened to bypass the institution's formal communication channels. Whatever it was, the palace viewed it as a potential tipping point, an event that could set off a chain reaction with consequences far beyond a single-family dispute. Sources indicate that the meeting itself was tense from the very beginning. Key advisors were summoned, including members of the royal household staff, protocol officers, and a few senior royals. The atmosphere, according to one insider, was electric with apprehension. Everyone present reportedly sensed that the discussion would determine the course of Meghan's involvement in succession matters for years to come. The conversation was described as highly structured, almost surgical, with officials carefully presenting evidence, concerns, and potential outcomes. But Meghan's response, or what she was believed to have said during the meeting, is what insiders claim pushed the palace over the edge. Witnesses suggest that Meghan may have challenged the boundaries that the palace had set in place for years, asserting her desire to remain actively involved in conversations regarding Archie and Lilibet. While this may seem like a reasonable request from a parent, within the context of royal tradition and protocol, it was viewed as a direct challenge to established procedures. For decades, the palace has operated on a careful balance of access, hierarchy, and discretion. Any attempt to circumvent or renegotiate that balance is not taken lightly. One senior aide described the moment as the line being crossed in a way the institution could not ignore. The palace's response was immediate and decisive. Within hours of the meeting, internal consultations were underway. Legal advisors, protocol experts, and senior royal officials convened to determine the best course of action. The consensus was clear. Meghan's continued involvement posed risks that could not be mitigated by informal measures. The solution, they concluded, was to formalize her exclusion from all communications relating to succession matters. A decision that would be delivered with the clarity and finality only the palace could provide. Interestingly, sources suggest that the trigger event may not have been a single moment, but rather the culmination of several smaller incidents, patterns that, when viewed together, painted a picture of potential instability. Leaks to the media, repeated attempts to bypass formal channels, and high-profile public statements were all considered warning signs. To the palace, the timing of the announcement was as important as the content itself. Acting swiftly allowed them to control the narrative, prevent further leaks, and demonstrate authority. In the royal world, perception is often as critical as reality, and the palace clearly understood the stakes. But the trigger also had a deeply human component. Beyond protocol and procedure, it touched on relationships, emotions, and the dynamics between Meghan, Harry, and the senior royals. The meeting reportedly revealed frustrations that had been simmering for years, misunderstandings, disagreements over roles, and personal clashes. Some insiders suggest that Meghan's attempts to assert her position were interpreted as defiance rather than advocacy, a misreading that intensified the palace's sense of urgency. The combination of human emotion and institutional concern created a perfect storm, resulting in a decision that was both strategic and symbolic. The speed with which the palace moved after the trigger event was remarkable. Within 24 hours, internal directives were issued to staff, communications were drafted, and preparations were made for the formal announcement. The process was described by insiders as methodical and deliberate, leaving nothing to chance. Every detail, from the wording of the memo to the timing of its release, was carefully considered to maximize clarity and minimize ambiguity. This level of planning underscores just how seriously the palace viewed the potential consequences of the trigger event. Of course, the reaction from Meghan and Harry's team was immediate. Sources report shock, frustration, and a sense of disbelief at the speed and finality of the palace's response. Attempts at private intervention, including calls and messages to senior officials, were reportedly met with polite but firm refusal. The message was clear. The decision was non-negotiable, and the trigger event had created circumstances that could not be undone. For Meghan, this meant not just the loss of formal access, but a profound shift in her influence over her children's roles within the monarchy. Some insiders believe that the trigger event also served as a wake-up call for the palace itself. It highlighted vulnerabilities in succession communication protocols, the potential for leaks, and the need for greater control over sensitive information. By acting decisively, the palace not only addressed the immediate situation but also sent a broader message to staff, advisors, and even the public. The monarchy will act to protect itself, and no individual, regardless of relationship or status, is exempt from institutional boundaries. The trigger event also carries implications for public perception. In an age where every royal move is scrutinized and dissected, the timing and response to the incident could influence narratives for years. Social media erupted almost immediately, with fans, critics, and journalists speculating on the cause, the fallout, and the potential consequences. The trigger became a point of fascination, with many wondering whether it was a single breach, a misstep, or a carefully orchestrated moment that left the palace no choice but to act. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the trigger event is what it reveals about Meghan's position within the monarchy. For all her public visibility, influence, and media presence, the incident underscores a stark reality. The palace maintains ultimate control over access, communication, and authority. Personal relationships, public approval, or even past contributions cannot override the institutional rules. Meghan's exclusion is not just a consequence of one meeting. It is a statement about the limits of individual influence within the royal hierarchy, a lesson that carries both emotional and symbolic weight. In the end, the trigger event forced the palace to draw a line in the sand. It revealed vulnerabilities, highlighted potential conflicts, and created an environment in which decisive action was necessary. By formalizing Meghan's exclusion, the monarchy ensured that the future of succession communications, and by extension, the influence over Archie and Lilibet, remains firmly within the control of senior officials. The message is unmistakable. Boundaries have been set, and they will be enforced. But the story doesn't end there. While the trigger event forced the palace's hand, it also set the stage for a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the meeting room. For Meghan and Harry, for their children, and for the institution itself, the consequences of this moment are only beginning to unfold. Every decision, every reaction, and every whisper will now be shaped by the fallout. And the next revelation, what actually happened during the trigger event, is something that few outside the palace will ever forget. Few people outside the royal bubble truly understand the delicate dance required to navigate life within the palace. Every smile, every gesture, every word spoken, even in private, is scrutinized, recorded, and measured against centuries of tradition. It's a world built on rules that rarely bend and customs that cannot be ignored. And when Meghan Markle entered this world, she brought with her an entirely different set of expectations, experiences, and instincts. Ones shaped by Hollywood, media scrutiny, and a fierce sense of independence. From the very beginning, the clash between Meghan's modern approach and the palace's time-honored protocols was inevitable. It started subtly. Staff quickly noticed her preference for direct communication, sometimes bypassing traditional channels to achieve her goals. Courtiers, trained for decades in the art of measured diplomacy, viewed this as audacity, perhaps even disrespect. Meghan's efforts to influence events, engage with charitable causes, and assert her perspective were often seen not as initiative, but as challenges to established norms. She was, in many ways, rewriting the rules by which the palace had operated for centuries, a move that earned her admirers outside the walls, but quietly unsettled those within them. Reports began to surface early on, a misaligned itinerary here, a breach of protocol there, meetings arranged without proper consultation. These incidents, while individually minor, accumulated into a narrative that Meghan was difficult to manage within the strict confines of royal procedure. Staff described a learning curve that was far steeper than anticipated. Every attempt to modernize or innovate, whether through social initiatives, public appearances, or personal decisions, was measured against the rigid standards of the monarchy. And when those standards were not met, tensions inevitably rose. The Megxit saga exemplified this clash in the most dramatic way. Meghan and Harry's decision to step back from official duties was framed publicly as a move for autonomy, privacy, and mental health. Behind the scenes, however, it represented a rupture in the traditional chain of command. Royal aides, accustomed to orchestrating events, managing appearances, and controlling messaging, suddenly had to navigate a high-profile couple who sought independence from the institution itself. The move was unprecedented in modern history and sent shockwaves throughout the palace hierarchy. For senior royals, it was both a logistical nightmare and a symbolic threat. If Meghan and Harry could redefine their roles, what precedent would that set for the future? Even before stepping back from official duties, Meghan had a history of moments that rubbed palace insiders the wrong way. There were reports of conflicts with staff over scheduling, ceremonial protocol, and the handling of sensitive engagements. One source described an incident in which a minor change in an official program led to a heated internal debate, highlighting the friction between Meghan's urgency to act and the palace's emphasis on procedure. While outsiders might see this as normal disagreement, within the palace, it was interpreted as an early sign that Meghan's approach to protocol could create systemic challenges. Perhaps most notably, media exposure magnified every incident. Meghan's life had been lived in the public eye long before she married into the monarchy, and she understood how to control narratives, leverage press coverage, and cultivate influence. Within the palace, however, this skill was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed Meghan to champion causes and engage with global audiences in ways unprecedented for a royal spouse. On the other hand, it created fear among staff that information could escape, narratives could be shaped externally, and the monarchy's message could be compromised. Every decision she made was now not only internal but global in consequence. The tension between Meghan and protocol wasn't limited to formal engagements. There were also reports of disagreements over the subtler aspects of royal life, how traditions were observed, how communication flowed, and even the etiquette surrounding private family matters. While Meghan's intentions were reportedly sincere, they often conflicted with the palace's long-established practices. One insider described it as two worlds colliding, one built on centuries of ceremonial precision, the other on immediacy, authenticity, and personal autonomy. For the palace, reconciling these two worlds proved challenging and, in some cases, impossible. These cumulative clashes provide critical context for understanding the palace's recent decision to formally exclude Meghan from succession communications. While the immediate trigger event was dramatic and specific, the decision did not occur in a vacuum. It was shaped by a pattern of incidents spanning years, illustrating a consistent tension between Meghan's approach and the expectations of the royal institution. In other words, the exclusion is as much about history as it is about a single moment. The palace, viewing the risks through the lens of precedent, concluded that maintaining the status quo was no longer feasible. Interestingly, not all observers view these clashes as purely negative. Many see Meghan as a disruptor, someone challenging outdated practices and bringing much-needed modernization to a centuries-old institution. Her approach to charity, mental health, and media engagement has garnered international acclaim and reshaped the public perception of what a royal spouse can do. Yet within the palace, this same energy was often perceived as unpredictable, challenging, and sometimes threatening to established hierarchies. It is precisely this duality, the admiration outside versus the concern inside, that makes the situation so volatile. One of the most contentious aspects of Meghan's history with protocol involves her interactions with succession matters. While few details are public, insiders hint at repeated attempts to assert influence over decisions, engage directly with staff managing succession updates, and advocate for her children's positions in ways that bypass traditional processes. For the palace, these actions were alarming. The monarchy is built on careful, measured communication, especially regarding succession, where even minor errors or leaks can have long-lasting implications. Meghan's attempts, however well-intentioned, were seen as potential threats to institutional stability. And yet, it's important to recognize the human element. Meghan is not merely a public figure or an institution challenger. She is also a mother, a partner, and a human being navigating an extraordinarily complex and restrictive environment. Her desire to engage with her children's succession and roles is, in many ways, entirely natural. The clash arises because her instincts as a parent intersect with the rigid rules of monarchy, a collision that produces both emotional tension and strategic concern. The palace, in responding decisively, is asserting institutional authority, but the emotional consequences of that authority cannot be ignored. The history of these clashes sets the stage for the recent trigger event and the unprecedented exclusion from succession communications. It provides context for why the palace acted with such speed and decisiveness. Meghan's pattern of interactions, combined with the specific circumstances leading up to the announcement, created a situation in which the institution felt compelled to intervene. This is not merely a story of one meeting, one memo, or one decision. It is the culmination of years of tension, negotiation, and, ultimately, irreconcilable differences between personal ambition and institutional expectation. Even so, the drama does not end there. Meghan's history with protocol also reveals a critical insight. The palace is acutely aware of how actions ripple outward. Every decision regarding Meghan affects public perception, media narratives, and internal morale. By formally excluding her from succession communications, the palace is attempting to contain not just information, but potential disruptions that could arise from ongoing conflicts. The move is simultaneously preventative and symbolic, reinforcing boundaries while signaling control. Yet, despite the formal structures and centuries of tradition, one truth remains. Human emotion is unpredictable. Meghan's reactions, Harry's interventions, and the responses of those around them continue to shape events in real time. The clash between Meghan and protocol is not simply historical. It is ongoing, dynamic, and increasingly consequential. Every past incident, every tension point, every perceived challenge contributes to the narrative that has led to this unprecedented exclusion. And it's that cumulative weight that makes the current moment so explosive. And now, as the palace moves forward, the question becomes not just about history, but about consequence. How will Meghan respond to being formally cut out of succession communications? How will Harry navigate the delicate balance of loyalty, advocacy, and public scrutiny? And most importantly, what will this mean for Archie and Lilibet, whose futures are now shaped in part by decisions made without their mother's input? The answers are as complex as the history that led to this moment. Few outside the palace truly understand the mechanisms behind succession communication. To the public, it may seem like a simple line of names on a list: king, prince, and so on. But in reality, succession is a highly orchestrated system of information flow, protocol, and oversight, designed over centuries to protect the monarchy from chaos, confusion, and misstep. Every decision, every update, every ceremonial duty tied to succession is carefully documented, communicated, and reviewed. And now, Meghan Markle has been formally cut out of that entire process, a move that, to insiders, is as dramatic as it is unprecedented. So, how does succession communication work? At the highest level, it's a structured, multi-tiered system. Key stakeholders, including senior royals, private secretaries, and protocol officers, receive regular briefings on the line of succession, upcoming ceremonial responsibilities, emergency contingencies, and updates on the roles of heirs. These communications are highly confidential. They are delivered through secure channels, sometimes in person, sometimes in encrypted written form, and always within a tightly controlled framework. Each member of the family who is entitled to receive this information has their access carefully monitored and verified. Think of it like a networked system where information flows only to those with permission, and every access point is logged. This ensures both accuracy and discretion. A leak, a misunderstanding, or even informal discussions can have major consequences, not just for the family, but for public confidence in the monarchy itself. And in this environment, any deviation from protocol is taken seriously. Insiders explain that succession communications are not a matter of ego or bureaucracy. They are a protective measure. They maintain the integrity of the line, prevent conflicts of interest, and safeguard sensitive information. Inside the palace, succession communications are taken seriously for another reason: the risk of misinformation. Even minor misunderstandings can create ripples of speculation, public misperception, or internal tension. For example, if a junior member misinterprets a schedule or a protocol requirement, it can result in breaches of tradition, awkward public appearances, or media scrutiny. That's why the channels are strictly managed. Every memo, every briefing, and every conversation is part of a closed loop. It's a system built to prevent chaos, and one that relies on trust, discipline, and compliance. By removing Meghan from the loop, the palace is signaling that trust has been formally rescinded in this particular area. The implications for Meghan are profound. Even if she receives updates through Harry or other intermediaries, she no longer has direct access to primary communications. In practical terms, this means she cannot request clarifications, submit questions, or provide input on decisions affecting her children. Any attempt to engage directly would constitute a breach of protocol, potentially escalating tensions further. Insiders note that this formal exclusion is unusual, particularly given Meghan's status as the mother of two of the monarchy's youngest heirs. No other parent in living memory has been subjected to such strict boundaries. To fully grasp the significance, consider the multiple layers of succession communication. First, there are the formal written updates, often detailing ceremonial duties, public events, and changes to roles. These documents are secure and circulated only among those with verified access. Second, there are verbal briefings, delivered privately by trusted aides and secretaries, often in settings designed to maintain confidentiality. Third, there is coordination between members of the family, which can involve discussions about historical precedents, future planning, and long-term positioning within the hierarchy. Meghan's exclusion impacts all three layers, effectively isolating her from the mechanisms that determine the practical and symbolic roles of her children. Even more significant is the symbolic weight of the exclusion. Succession communication isn't merely informational. It represents authority, influence, and inclusion. To be cut out is to be formally told, you do not participate in shaping this future. For Meghan, who has spent years navigating a system built on inherited tradition, this is a stark reminder of the boundaries imposed by the monarchy. Sources say that, emotionally, it is a particularly painful blow because it strikes at both her parental role and her identity within the royal framework. Another crucial element is the security and confidentiality protocols embedded in succession communications. Given the global attention on the royal family, leaks or unauthorized sharing can have massive consequences. Every word, every update, and every memo is potentially newsworthy, making the system highly sensitive. By excluding Meghan, the palace minimizes the risk of unintended disclosures, controlling both the flow of information and the public narrative. From a strategic perspective, it is a defensive move, but one that carries significant personal and emotional consequences for her family. Yet, the process is not purely about restriction. It also ensures clarity and coordination. Succession communication is designed to prevent confusion over titles, precedents, and responsibilities. Every ceremonial role, every public duty, and every line of succession update must be carefully orchestrated. A single error can create diplomatic embarrassment, public criticism, or internal discord. For Meghan, exclusion from this process means that she is no longer formally privy to the orchestration of events that her children may participate in. It is a deliberate separation from the machinery that shapes the monarchy's future. The practical effects are already being felt. Insiders note that Harry, as Meghan's primary conduit, now carries the burden of translating and navigating these communications. He must act as intermediary, balancing his wife's desire for involvement with the palace's strict boundaries. This added layer of complexity increases both logistical challenges and emotional tension. For Meghan, reliance on an intermediary can feel like distance, exclusion, and a loss of agency. For the palace, it reduces risk and ensures protocol compliance. But it also guarantees that every interaction is fraught with scrutiny and potential misunderstanding. Public perception plays a major role as well. The monarchy relies on trust, consistency, and transparency, at least in terms of predictability. While most of the mechanics of succession communication remain invisible to the public, leaks, rumors, or perceived slights can generate media storms. By excluding Meghan, the palace is signaling both internally and externally that rules are enforced, boundaries exist, and access is a privilege, not a right. It is a lesson in institutional authority, one that carries both symbolic and practical weight. And yet, even with all the structure, the exclusion introduces new risks. Sources suggest that internal stress levels have risen among staff as they navigate the delicate balance of enforcing protocol while managing public scrutiny. Any misstep could be interpreted as a breach, creating further tension. In effect, Meghan's removal from succession communications creates a ripple effect. The system itself becomes both more secure and more fragile, requiring constant vigilance. Ultimately, the palace's decision demonstrates a key principle. Succession communication is both powerful and personal. It is not just about lines of inheritance or ceremonial planning. It is about authority, influence, and control. By formally excluding Meghan, the institution has made a statement about hierarchy, boundaries, and the limits of personal intervention. For Archie and Lilibet, the decision represents a shift in their mother's formal involvement, potentially reshaping their understanding of the monarchy and their place within it. And yet, as structured and controlled as succession communications are, they cannot fully contain human emotion. Meghan's response, Harry's interventions, and even the reactions of junior staff will all influence the next chapter. The palace has drawn a line, but how those lines are navigated, tested, or challenged remains uncertain. The stakes are immense, and every interaction will be scrutinized. Because in the world of royal succession, knowledge is power, and being cut off from that power is more than a procedural inconvenience. It is a dramatic, life-altering move that will resonate for years. When news of Meghan's exclusion from succession communications reached the inner circle, the reaction behind the gilded walls of the palace was immediate, intense, and deeply layered. Public statements rarely capture the intricate dynamics of the family, but inside those corridors, emotions ran high. Fear, anger, disbelief, and even resignation all mixed together in a tense symphony of human and institutional response. For decades, the palace has maintained an air of composed stoicism, but in moments like these, even the most seasoned courtiers and royals are human. According to insiders, the announcement created a palpable ripple effect. Senior royals convened in private chambers, discussing the implications in hushed tones. Some were shocked, others quietly relieved, and a few expressed concern about potential public fallout. It wasn't merely about protocol. It was about legacy, authority, and the optics of enforcing boundaries on a high-profile family member. The stakes were astronomical. Every reaction, no matter how subtle, carried weight that could echo through media channels, public opinion, and even political corridors. King Charles, according to multiple sources, reportedly felt torn between familial loyalty and institutional responsibility. While privately acknowledging the emotional toll this exclusion would have on his grandchildren and their mother, he was equally adamant that the integrity of the succession process must be preserved. One insider described him as resolute but visibly pained, understanding that every decision would be dissected by both the world and his family. In royal circles, duty often outweighs sentiment. And this was one of those moments where the two collided with a force that left no room for compromise. Prince William, too, reportedly had a strong reaction. Known for his commitment to maintaining the monarchy's stability, William is said to have supported the exclusion, viewing it as a necessary step to prevent further complications. However, His approach was measured. He recognized the potential for backlash, both internally and externally. Staff described his demeanor as pragmatic yet emotionally conflicted, navigating the dual pressures of family loyalty and institutional preservation. Sources suggest that William took particular interest in how the exclusion would affect young Archie and Lilibet, expressing concern for their emotional well-being while acknowledging the practical necessity of the decision. Other members of the family, including senior aides and courtiers, reportedly had their own internal debates. Some saw the move as overdue, citing a history of protocol breaches, media leaks, and behind-the-scenes tensions that had long threatened stability. Others feared that the decision, while administratively sound, could ignite public outrage and paint the monarchy as harsh or unsympathetic. These discussions were described as heated but restrained, reflecting the palace's culture of disciplined dialogue even in moments of deep disagreement. Interestingly, the reactions also varied by perspective. For those deeply embedded in operational management, private secretaries, protocol officers, and senior advisors, the move was logical, almost inevitable. Meghan's past history of bypassing channels, advocating for her children, and engaging with media scrutiny presented repeated challenges to established systems. By excluding her, the palace mitigated risk, ensuring that sensitive information remained in trusted hands. This faction viewed the decision less as a personal affront and more as a structural necessity, a safeguard to protect both the monarchy and its future heirs. Yet, emotion was impossible to suppress entirely. For some senior royals, the exclusion triggered memories of past family conflicts, highlighting the tension between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Staff reported that the mood in certain chambers was heavy with unspoken questions. How would Harry respond? Would this lead to a public dispute? Could the move affect the children's relationship with their mother? Behind the polished facade of ceremonial composure, doubt and anxiety quietly lingered. Even the courtiers closest to Meghan reportedly struggled with their positions. These staff members, who have historically managed her schedule, appearances, and communications, now found themselves in the impossible position of enforcing a boundary that could strain relationships. Some expressed concern about being caught between institutional directives and personal empathy. One source described a moment when a senior aide reportedly whispered, "We're managing a protocol, but we're dealing with real hearts too," capturing the human dimension that the palace rarely allows to be seen. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of the reaction was the family's strategic approach to containment. Insiders say that once initial emotions subsided, the focus shifted quickly to control of information, control of narrative, and control of potential fallout. The palace established strict guidelines for communication, specifying who could be informed, how updates would be delivered, and the exact wording of internal messages. The strategy was clear: contain the emotional ripple, prevent leaks, and maintain authority while minimizing the risk of public escalation. Every decision was deliberate, calculated, and executed with precision. Sources indicate that the family also discussed potential media spin, acknowledging that the announcement would dominate headlines. The palace has long understood the power of perception. Any internal conflict made public can shape narratives for years. The challenge now was twofold: enforce the exclusion internally while controlling how the world would interpret it. This balancing act, insiders say, is a constant concern for senior royals, who must weigh emotional, institutional, and political consequences simultaneously. But there was also a recognition of unintended consequences. By formally excluding Meghan, the palace risked provoking public sympathy for her, particularly given her role as a mother. Courtiers reportedly debated whether the decision might backfire, creating an image of coldness or detachment. However, the consensus remained. Protocol and institutional integrity must take precedence over public perception. In the palace's calculation, temporary public criticism was preferable to long-term systemic vulnerability. Within the family, one source noted that discussions went beyond Meghan herself, focusing on Harry's potential reactions and the implications for his relationship with senior royals. Harry has historically been fiercely protective of Meghan, and insiders speculated that this exclusion could reignite old tensions, influence media narratives, and complicate long-term family dynamics. There was also concern about the children, how they would perceive the situation and how their mother's exclusion might affect their understanding of family and duty. These considerations added layers of complexity to an already tense decision. Interestingly, the reaction also revealed internal divisions. While some royals and aides fully supported the decision, others were quietly apprehensive. These tensions, though not publicly visible, reflect the ongoing challenge of balancing tradition, authority, and family dynamics. The palace, sources say, is acutely aware that even minor disagreements, if exposed, could amplify public scrutiny and fuel narratives of division. The stakes, as always, are both human and institutional. Yet, despite the tension, the family maintained a front of composure. Reports indicate that senior royals immediately implemented a series of private briefings, ensuring that each member understood the reasoning, scope, and expected conduct regarding the exclusion. Staff were reminded of confidentiality, and contingency plans were discussed for potential leaks or unexpected reactions. The level of coordination underscores how seriously the palace viewed the situation, blending emotion, strategy, and authority into a single, disciplined response. Even as the family navigated these immediate reactions, they could not ignore the broader implications. Excluding Meghan from succession communications is unprecedented in modern royal history. It sends a signal not just to her, but to everyone in the institution. Rules are enforced, boundaries are non-negotiable, and even high-profile members are accountable. This is a moment that will be studied, discussed, and referenced for years to come, shaping perceptions of both Meghan and the monarchy itself. And yet, insiders note that this moment also created openings for negotiation and diplomacy. The palace recognizes that while the exclusion is formal and necessary, the human element remains unpredictable. Meghan's response, Harry's advocacy, and even subtle interventions from sympathetic family members could influence how the situation unfolds. The institution must now balance enforcement with adaptability, a delicate act that will test the limits of both protocol and family loyalty. As staff, aides, and royals continue to navigate these unprecedented circumstances, one thing is certain: the family is fully aware of the stakes. Every decision, every conversation, every action carries both immediate and long-term consequences. Excluding Meghan is not merely about controlling information. It is about shaping the narrative, preserving authority, and maintaining the stability of the monarchy in a world of constant scrutiny. But the full scope of the royal family's reaction, and how it would ripple outward to Meghan, Harry, and the children, remains unseen by the public. Behind closed doors, tension continues to build, alliances are subtly shifting, and the consequences of this unprecedented decision are only beginning to take shape. The world only saw a formal announcement. Meghan Markle was excluded from succession communications. The headlines flashed in seconds, and social media erupted with speculation, outrage, and sympathy. But behind closed doors, the reality was far more intense, far more personal, and far more emotionally charged. Meghan and Harry were not simply digesting a procedural decision. They were confronting a deeply symbolic blow that threatened both family relationships and the sense of agency they had fought to maintain for years. According to multiple insiders, the immediate reaction was a mix of shock, disbelief, and a simmering anger that quickly escalated. Meghan, sources say, was initially stunned. The idea that she would be formally cut out of communications concerning her own children struck her at the core. One aide described her response as a mix of professional composure and private devastation, a tension that perfectly encapsulates the experience of someone living in the public eye while navigating intensely personal matters. For Meghan, this was not a distant policy. It was a boundary drawn sharply between her and the futures of Archie and Lilibet. Harry's reaction, though quieter, was equally significant. He has long been fiercely protective of Meghan and deeply sensitive to perceived slights against her. Insiders describe him as immediately strategizing, weighing his next moves carefully while managing his own emotional response. His anger, while simmering beneath the surface, was paired with a clear focus on containment. How to respond without giving the palace further reason to escalate. How to protect Meghan emotionally, and how to shield their children from unnecessary exposure to the tension. The private conversations between Meghan and Harry reportedly lasted for hours. Sources revealed discussions about what the exclusion truly meant, not just in terms of protocol, but in terms of power, influence, and legacy. It wasn't just a procedural matter. They were talking about their role, their children's futures, and how the institution viewed them, an insider explained. They debated next steps, weighing options from private appeals to public messaging, and considered the long-term consequences for the family. Every word, every gesture, was measured against potential outcomes, legal, personal, and public. One of the most striking